In a world filled with sharks, bears, and killer bees, one man is brave enough to stay indoors to bring you the latest in gaming, movie, and pop culture news. That man is Tom Awesome, and this is the Outside is Overrated podcast.
Hello and welcome to Outside is Overrated Game Club. Today we're breaking down the first act of Ghost of Tsushima by Sucker Punch Productions. I'm your magnanimous host, Tom Sidlogic, and joining me for the discussion today are the Hobby Box, Joe Burns.
Heyo.
Dr. B, Brian Camille.
Hi, everybody.
John Munch.
Howdy, howdy.
And Patreon supporter Mike Mathwig.
Gentlemen.
I feel like I should just start dropping the Patreon supporters since you're on almost every game club now, Mike. Do you feel slighted? I like calling out that you're on here because it's open to all Patreon supporters, but I don't want to make you feel like you're...
I'm not particular. You could just call me, super great guy, whatever. Yeah, whatever's appropriate.
Yeah, you want me to start making brown knuckle jokes about you, or should I keep that just for Casey?
That's probably a Casey thing, I think.
All right. Well, in this monthly segment, we play a game with our community, and we invite all of our Patreon supporters to join in on the discussion. If you want to join us for, say, our Ghost of Tsushima Part 2 discussion or any other game club, support Outside is Overrated on Patreon at patreon.com/OiO. That's patreon.com/OiO. You can help for as little as $2 a month. Outside is Overrated is presented by Premier Health. Check out their website at premierhealthmn.com. That's premierhealthmn as in Minnesota.com. I'll start by setting the expectations for what we're going to cover in this Part 1 discussion in Ghost of Tsushima. We're going to talk about the Act 1 story. There will be spoilers around Act 1 of the story. It's a 3-act story. We're going to talk about the combat. We'll discuss progression systems. And we're going to talk about side content. Ghost of Tsushima originally released in July 2020. I'm playing the director's cut, which came out in 2021 and has a Metacritic rating of 87. For the core gameplay loop of Ghost of Tsushima, you play as Jin Sakai, a samurai on the island of Tsushima. After the Mongols invade in 1274, you're left with one option. Murder everything that moves on the island. Murder everything that stares in the corners on the island. You kill enemies, liberate areas, spend skill points, and kill more dudes. Traveling between Mongol clusters, you slowly uncover a huge open world where you climb like Nathan Drake, compose haikus, and rejuvenate in hot springs like the board game smash hit Tokaido.
It is a brilliant board game, that's for sure.
It's phenomenal, and anyone who dislikes that board game, I don't think they should be allowed to live on planet Earth, right? Like, at least not above ground. Maybe we can turn them into mole people. Just give them an endless...
That's your prerogative.
Yeah, endless supply of Memoir 44 underground. So Mike, this game takes place in 1274 during the first Mongol invasion of Japan. Would you say this game is a work of historical fiction?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, despite the fact it's set in a real place, at a specific point in time, and during a well-known historical event, it's not trying to represent the world. I think it's trying to pay homage to classic samurai cinema. The movies of Kurosawa, or the Musashi Miyamoto trilogy, those movies that, people other than Tom will have seen.
I was just going to say, I haven't seen any of those. I am going to watch a Kurosawa film tomorrow night, though. That is my commitment for our samurai discussion on Shogun. One Kurosawa film. I don't know, something off Max. I haven't picked it out yet. But my brother's coming over. We're going to have some ice cream. We're going to watch some samurais. It's going to be great.
The reason I wanted to bring that up, Tom, was that when this game came out, there was some criticism, which I thought was a little off base, that people didn't think that it was a good thing that they had done their samurais the way they did in the game because it was so unhistorical. But I'm like, they're not trying to be historical. They're paying, the movies themselves aren't historical either. They're at a remove from real samurai, and Sucker Punch is doing their own version, which is another level of remove from the movies. So they really shouldn't be expected to be real samurai, at least not to me. But I was curious what you guys thought of that criticism.
Well, John, what do you think of them not being real historical samurai?
Look, real is boring, right? Like, I think they did an amazing job of nailing what Kurosawa did, right? And hitting those feels. And honestly, like, that is what people associate samurais with. Like everything that we see in this game to me is a stylistic interpretation of what, like, you know, samurais were. And I think in any sort of like military movie, that's a stylized version of what those are. If you're watching Saving Private Ryan, that's a stylized version, albeit there's some realistic things that happen in that, but it's still movie magic, and they still are like heightening things up, right? And there's always that little hint of realism to certain things, like, oh yeah, that's exactly how they would have worn, like, you know, their swords or their armor, right? Or the kunai weapons they're using, or this or that. Those things can be realistic, but the through line of the story and kind of how they're doing that doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and my understanding is Sucker Punch spent a lot of time actually in Tsushima to work on capturing the landscape and capturing everything as accurately as possible. And it's not like it's performing the whole like 1-to-1 exact replica of the landmass. But my understanding is they did stay true to a lot of the different areas, and you know, the castle. The name is escaping me at the moment, but the castle, which is kind of the main focal point that you're working towards in Act 1, is an actual, I mean, it's not restored anymore, it's pretty much destroyed, but it is an actual castle that was on the island of Tsushima. And so I think it's really cool that they tried to represent the place as accurately as possible. But then, and while there might be some of the characters in this that are based off of actual characters in history, the majority aren't, because they wanted to create that world. And like you all were saying, you know, especially they mentioned throughout, you know, the development that a lot of one of their main sort of driving forces or main inspirations were like old samurai films, especially, you know, Akira Kurosawa. And, you know, so much so that they have in the game Kurosawa mode that you can turn on, which will basically make it black and white, and I think add like a bit of a film grain to it. Now, I haven't used it yet because, you know, the game's super beautiful and it does a lot with colors, and I don't want to sort of lose that to just everything being black and white. But before I'm finished with it, I will mess around with it and play the game a little bit in that, just to sort of harken back to some of those times. And so I think that's like the main difference between Ghost of Tsushima and then Shogun, which we'll be talking about on February's OiO episode, because Shogun is a work of historical fiction where the vast majority of the characters are based on one or two people in Japanese history. And it all is kind of playing through actual events that took place over a very specific time period in Japan. And so, you know, while it's different in that sense, I think there's still a lot of commonalities that we'll see between the game and the series, which is based off of the book. And so there's definitely some things that they did really well to capture the samurai spirit, while adding their own sort of storylines that they want to deal with. And, you know, historically, this game was actually really well received in Japan, even though it was, you know, a Japanese game made by a Western studio. You know, Japanese players, I believe, really enjoyed the game, and it sold really well in Japan. And you counter that with Assassin's Creed Shadows, which was supposed to come out last fall, is going to come out this spring in 2025, and has had, you know, everybody's been begging for them to make a samurai Assassin's Creed game for the longest time. And then you have, you know, years ahead of time, Ghost of Tsushima kind of stealing their lunch and doing it so well that it's going to be really hard for them to live up to that. And they've actually run into some issues with some of the historical inaccuracies that they played with in the creation of Shadows for Assassin's Creed. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how well received that is when that finally comes out. But Ghost of Tsushima is a gem so far.
Yeah, I'm sure it's well received because it's just a phenomenal game, top to bottom. Does anyone have a rebuttal for Joey before I start poking at Brian? All right. So, Brian Guy, do you like the approach that they take, or would you have preferred a more Tales of the Borderland take on like a historical Japanese documentary?
It is very interesting to me when it comes to the things that people get upset about at times. And I'm guilty of this too. But I think I find it fascinating where when you play a game, so like the Kurosawa films, I have seen a couple of them, and you can tell that when we play something like this, we've talked about it before, when the source material is viewed with a lot of love and a lot of effort goes into it, it just shows with the gameplay. And I am known for a guy that is not a super big fan of story and some other aspects of it. When, like, say, Borderlands is a great example. Thank you, Tom. Of like Borderlands 2 had a great story, and then you get into Borderlands 3 and things just kind of fall apart. And like, I'm playing it because of the gameplay. I'm not playing it because of the story. This is a game where it's equal parts both, and the story is so good. The Jin and his uncle are very interesting. What's happening in the region, and then just kind of the understanding of the dichotomy of like how Jin has been told to confront these kinds of challenges, and in reality, how you have to deal with these challenges. So people can complain about it all they want to. That's fine. But I think if you take the game at just the face value for where the game is, I don't think you need to be upset that, they were using a form of recurve bow that wasn't going to be invented for another 8 years in the game. I think nerds can be overtly toxic. And I think Joe kind of sums it up well as he kind of goes through talking about it. It's just like when the source material does well in Japan when created by a Western studio, you did something right. And that is not the easiest feat to pull off. And it was received well. And that's, I don't know, what more can you say than I think that it just shows that it was done correctly.
Now, not to get too sidetracked, this is just sort of a brief aside here. Did Borderlands 2 really have a good story, or did it just have a really good villain, and that carried you through the entire experience? I don't know that the story, not that I've beaten it, but I don't know that the story is that standout in the game, is it?
Well,
I think
Borderlands
that-
story it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's a fair point too. I think good characters make the game interesting. I think gray characters that are struggling with moral ambiguity, make the game interesting. I think Handsome Jack is above and it goes above and beyond with just being this bombastic, loud character that you just kind of want to keep hearing sling one-liners. That still works. But at the same time too, I think that sometimes games get too bogged down in trying to do storytelling. And the problem winds up being is that the story they're telling sometimes is not all that interesting. And if you're not having people connect with the story, I played Pillars. Was it Divine Pillars? Pillars of the Divine. What is a stupid ass game?
Pillars of Eternity?
Played it. First 20 minutes of it, boring as hell. So I checked out.
Hey, Braga,
The fact that they couldn't put it well together. I'm sorry. Just lack of talent in the writing room. Yes.
Hey, stop swearing, please. I don't edit the show.
Sorry. Okay, I'll try not to.
You know what game had really, really great characters and that, lots of moral ambiguity between them was Tales from the Borderlands. So
I knew this.
that might be one for you to check out at some point.
Man,
Sounds like it'd
this-
be right up your
is-
alley, Brian.
Are we just gonna keep just kicking? This horse is decomposed, and there's the ribs are exposed, most of the viscera are gone, and you guys are just beating on this thing. That might have been pre-COVID, just for clarity. That might have been pre-COVID.
Bring it back to life and kill it again. It's never gonna die. It's never.
John's
The only way it dies is if you actually play the game, and then you have an opinion. So until you play the game, we will continue to harp on you.
I'd rather go through a choose your own adventure with Carmen Sandiego than play that game again. That was horrid, and the company went bankrupt for good reason.
I like how he
Checkmate.
says, "Play that game again." I don't think you can say that when you only played 5 minutes.
He did play 5
Hey,
minutes,
I
or
got
he would have
the
gotten
first
that first
trophy.
trophy.
Oh, he got the first trophy. That's right.
Boom.
All right.
Boom.
Okay.
Braga, I
Back to
double checked your
Samurais.
trophies. I don't think that you got the first trophy. But hey, let's talk about combat in Ghost of Tsushima. That's where we'll start. You spend most of your time as Lord Sakai stabbing and slicing your way through the invading army. You have a katana, a tanto, a bow, and several types of thrown weapons at your disposal. Burns, how did you approach combat through the first act plus of this game?
So it changed quite a bit for me from at the very start of the game to when I got to where I'm at now. Early on, I did rely a lot more on stealth. In games like this, like open world games, I tend to, if there is a really good stealth mechanic to it, I tend to lean on that because that is always a really fun sort of puzzle to try to figure out, is what combination of things can I do to take out all of these people. That's one of the reasons why I really liked like the Hitman series, is it's like, how can I take all these people out without alerting anybody, you know? But as you start to unlock more abilities for Jin in his like fighting styles, that gameplay just became so much more interesting and fun to me, as well as just like the story sort of impacts that it shapes it in, of, you know, whether, you know, him kind of always battling between, you know, fighting in an honorable way like all samurai do, or a dishonorable way, which is the Ghost sort of style. But yeah, the standoffs are super fun. And then just like, you know, as you unlock more and more of the samurai skills, I feel like it's just such a more interesting level of combat. There's still points in the game where it forces you to utilize the stealth, but yeah, I liked leaning into a lot more of the samurai stuff now where I'm at in the game.
John, what about you? We'll start with the people who haven't finished the game, then we'll go to Brian and Mike after John and I go.
Yeah, I mean, I never really locked into a certain way of attacking things, right? Which I actually really love, right? Every time I would come up onto a new thing, whether I'm running around the road and I got an opportunity for a standoff, whether I'm attacking a base, I'm saving a farm, right? To me, it was just, you know, a pure playground of like, oh, what do I have at my disposal and what do I feel like doing now? I do really like what Joey said about like how like they do force you into some story missions where they say, hey, no, you have to do it this way this time, and not just from a sneaky like way. Most of the time, that's where most games will be like, hey, I know you don't want to do stealth, but we're gonna make you do stealth for 5 minutes because we put it in here and everyone has to do it, right? But they also do that with like some actual like, no, you have to just go fight these guys. Like, you're not getting away with like not fighting this general or this or that. So I do think too, one other really cool thing they do early on, right, that I'm not finding you don't do after a while because you kind of end up is like stealth is a much bigger part of the game early on because you want to like go find the general so you can like see and like scope out the general because it helps you get closer to learning a new stance and a new technique. So they do a really good job of that pacing where they're like, we know you're way more squishy in the beginning, so we're going to like incentivize you to sneak around more until now you've learned all these moves and you can just be like, you can truly be the Ghost and destroy everything.
It's interesting. I had 3 very distinct phases of evolution with combat through, because when I went into the game thinking, I'm going to be super sneaky, I'm going to shoot dudes with arrows, it's going to be great. And then I got the standoff mechanic. And the way the standoff works, when you approach a group of enemies or a base, you hold down up on the D-pad and you do a standoff. And you'll be standing face to face with an enemy, and you have to wait until he's charging at you with an attack to hit Y or X, or your attack button. You kill him, and you can upgrade that to kill up to 3 dudes. I'm like, oh, well, stealth is dead forever. I'm going to do standoffs, and I did a lot of standoffs.
Wait till there is an armor you get where you can bump that up to killing 5.
Yes.
Which is pure awesome.
Awesome. So I did standoffs for a long time. Then eventually I'm like, well, I'm kind of bored with standoffs. So I decided to start sneaking and like, okay, well, this is fun. I'm shooting dudes with arrows. But then I got so much health and I upgraded my armor and I upgraded my katana. And like the combat was imposing a lot of challenge. So I just started running into full Tom mode where I like ride Nobu full sprint right into the middle of the base, jump off and start swinging. And until I ran into Straw Hat Ronins in Act 2, like I just mowed through the end of Act 1 like that. And it's like, oh, well, this is pretty silly and fun.
Yeah, that's very realistic to how samurais operated back in the day. You know, they would jump off their horses and just slice and dice everybody in as vicious a way as possible. So Tom's actually just RPing his way through the game.
Yeah.
Walk outside the village, yell, challenge me, and then kill everyone that walks out the gate.
Yeah. I just wish I could have like a glowing like laser sword. That'd be really rad. So, Mike, I know that you
can start it on fire later.
Nice. Mike, I know you've beaten this game. How did you approach combat your first time through? Now that you've gone back to the game, has your approach changed at all?
First time I was very, very stealthy. I was really trying to be stealthy in almost everything I did. More because it felt like a stealth game to me at the start, and I just kind of stuck with it. This time I'm rarely being stealthy. I usually just roll in and slap everyone around. except when you're doing the missions with the NPCs, like with Lady Masako, I'll be all combat. With the Sensei, I do archery, and with Yuna, I'm very stealthy. So, it kind of depends on that.
So Mike's on the all-Tom RP train. What about you, Bra Guy?
I think I started off with stealth, and kind of as you kind of build out your kit, there's a lot of different things you can do with stealth to distract and pull and do those kinds of things with enemies. The standoff mechanic I do really enjoy a ton, though. It's kind of like a fun little mini game, right? So you hold down triangle, and then if you release triangle before they attack you, you get almost killed. You are punished severely for screwing that up. But as I was playing, once I learned, like, okay, they do these like feints to their upper body to try to draw you into releasing the button. But if you watch their feet never lie. The second they step forward, that's your indicator, because they will never move their feet until they try to attack. But the problem winds up being, like you had mentioned, you're so squishy early on, that might not be the best approach. So the nice thing is that I could stealth out most of the place, and then once you've killed most people, and say you can't find like the last two people, the game will give you the option going, hey, do you want to hold up and call whatever people are left to you? And I'm like, yes, I do. Thank you for respecting my time. Because I don't know where this dude is, but he clearly exists somewhere in a corner, or possibly a curved surface that we're debating whether or not is a corner. So I was a lot of stealth early on, and the cool part was, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but as you play, if you are by Jin's honor code, when you do the samurai stuff, that's what he was taught to do. It's quote unquote honorable. Like we said, the ghost stuff is dishonorable. But if you do more ghost stuff, the world is like, if you guys notice, the weather's more stormy. The more you're in ghost mode, it makes the weather storm. It makes it dark and dreary. The more you do samurai stuff, it's more bright, and like the sun's out, the birds are chirping. So the game kind of incentivizes you that way. But I think even now on my second playthrough, it's kind of a mix of both, just because it is kind of fun to stealth out and just kill everybody. But it's certainly not required. It's much more of a bloodbath if you choose to be so.
Any of you guys try to do a bunch of standoffs when you have a bit of a buzz going?
No.
It gets significantly more challenging. I had a couple of nights when I was playing when Phoenix was up at her parents' house with the kiddos, and so like I'm just having some drinks, playing Ghost, having a great time, and it's like, oh, I'm not doing very well with these standoffs. I think that might have been the start of full Tom mode for the combat.
Friend of the show, Corey Helene, and I spent a New Year's Eve one time just drinking a whole bunch and playing Guitar Hero. Anything that takes a little bit more precision breaks down real fast, like real fast. And it's like, well, let's just do something else. Let's play cards. So, I would imagine that being a little tipsy, this would be tough.
That's like times like in college when you'd get drunk and then play GTA, and it's just like you get progressively worse at traversing the world the more drinks you get in, and so that was always a good time too.
Yeah, don't drink in Samurai, folks. One other note I had on combat, like it is one of the first things that I do once I've drawn everyone in and know what I'm dealing with. I kill every archer because like they just irritate me. And yeah, I have the skill where I can just hold down the block button and it'll deflect, but like the archers yell when they shoot. That's helpful, but I still find them super irritating, so archers must die first.
Yeah,
and if they interrupt you, they will do lots of damage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just like other games where you always kill the healer first, right? Because it just prolongs the battle. That's all the archers do, is just get in the way and frustrate and prolong the battle. So yeah, take the weaker ones out first, and then you go and hammer on the big boys.
Yeah, take that, big boy. As you progress, you earn skill points, which you can invest in samurai skills, which are primarily deflection or evasion skill trees, or in stances, which combat different types of enemies, or the less honorable ghost tree and its fun thrown weapons. Brian, how did you prioritize kitting out your character both your first full playthrough and now New Game Plus?
Well, New Game Plus, everything's already done. So that was, you just have everything that you did, which is great. The original time when I was kind of kitting out initially, I do think I did a lot more ghost early on. I got enough basic parries in to make sure that I could be effective in combat. But the second you can start learning some of those new stances, So there's really 4 main stances. You have a stance based on dealing with those that are wielding swords. You have a stance that's based on people dealing spears. You have a stance based on people that are really, really large. So like kind of like your tanky guys of the group. And then what's the other one that I'm missing? Shields,
Spearman.
swords,
sword,
spears,
brutes.
tank. Yeah.
Yeah.
So once you kind of have one for everything, and the game makes it pretty easy to move between these. You're just so much more effective in combat. It actually makes it so that you can physically take down villages if you want to with just sword skills. But early on, it is a huge challenge, particularly the first time you meet spears. And if you do not have that kind of skill set unlocked to kind of handle their parries, it is obnoxious because a lot of the stuff they do is straight up unblockable and they have range. So once I kind of ran into enough spear guys, and the game kind of introduces each of these types of different combatants over time. They're not all introduced at once. It does like kind of incentivize you. Okay, dealing with a bunch of these guys, I got to learn. Dealing with a bunch of these guys, I got to learn. But like to John said, Ghost is great early on because it lets me sit, I can hide. And most of these little villages and these little Mongol taken territories, you can find a general practicing a stance. You can find a vantage point, watch them, and then you can actually earn points to unlocking these stances quite a bit quicker, which is critical if you want to deal with some of this stuff later on. Because the worst thing is early on in the game is if you are a ghost and you do set off the alarm, if a group comes at you, you don't have a lot of life, you don't have enough abilities to really handle kind of what they are going to be bringing to you from a physical combat standpoint, and you might be just resetting the scenario because you can get stomped on real fast.
Yeah, and I think the stances just in general, like when you're in combat too and switching between them based upon what's attacking you, it just looks cool because it looks like the character actually is in a very distinct, different stance, and their attacks move in a different way. And it's just like if you can pay attention to that while you're playing through it as well, like it just looks cool, and it looks like you're actually in like the character is doing these strategies because this would work better against this type of person. So the way that not only feels to switch between them and then how it looks on the screen, it's just a really cool experience how that all sort of meshes together and adds to the weight of the combat.
And they made each stance look very different and unique compared to what the other ones are. So that it just kind of further accentuates, like you said, that flow between stances. But I love smoke bombs, throw them down, and chain kill. Chain killing is awesome in this game. You can kill up to 3 separate people, and that's a great way to just clear some people out. The second you throw down a smoke bomb, you can now insta-kill all 3 people that are next to you, which is a lifesaver. I love throwing sticky bombs for just the straight chaos of it. I probably didn't use kunai knives well enough, but once you can kind of max out how many people you can handle in a standoff too, those ones are quick ones to get because particularly the standoff one, you can eliminate most of those like rogue groups that are along the roads. You can kill everybody in one standoff, and then you're just on the way again.
Yeah, standoff is a great mechanic. John, how did you prioritize building out your character?
I focused on those 2 skill trees first, right? Because that's where you do get like your parries, you do get your standoffs, right? And then the next thing I was always focused on was really the stances, right? Because I took it down and said, all right, if I have a stance, great. Get to the second, or especially for spears, get to the third because you get like an auto parry, right? And once I get that, then it's just like, okay, what do I like to use? And it would just jump back into the other ghost weapon trees and pick the ones that I'm using the most often and just upgrade it. It was nice because there was nothing that you needed to get that felt like, oh gosh, the game is not the same without this skill. Everything just gives built upon itself really, really nice with the skill trees.
Yeah, I was almost identical to you, John. Like I did the deflection tree first, then I did sticky bombs, then I did all the stance points, and that's about where I'm at right now.
Okay. I do have to say, kunai are the best, right? Sticky bombs are fun, right? And it is amazing to watch them freak out when they get stuck on somebody. But once you get kunai upgraded, they are to me because the one thing we didn't touch on combat is really what it comes down to is you stagger your opponents by using your heavy attack, and then you break stagger, and then you just attack, kill, right? and each one of your stances will stagger the different enemies, spear versus sword versus brute. But kunai basically breaks stagger for everything. So like you can walk in and there's a group of 3 guys or those stupid dogs that are with them all the time, and you just throw the kunai and the dogs are dead, and then the guys are at half health and their stagger's broken, and you just go in there and you mop the floor. So that's why I love
John,
the kunai are awesome.
Are the kunai silent too?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that when I kill dogs with kunai now, so now I think I throw, at this point in the game, I throw 3 and they do double damage. Those dogs, you can just delete them off, and I can't think of a single time that alerts anybody. Like, it is kind of overpowered if you have enough of them.
They are quiet. They're awesome. And we didn't even talk about the poison darts, which are really fun.
Oh, I don't have a poison dart yet.
Yeah.
That's an Act 2 thing.
Oh man, that'll be fun.
Look forward to.
Joey, Mike, did you guys want to talk about your loadouts at all?
I just want to mention the greatest thing you can do in this game to me is you get into a nice central location where there's a fair number of enemies around. You throw the firecrackers, you get them all to come over to the firecrackers, and then you throw a couple of bombs at them, and you just watch them fly. And it's so satisfying.
You're not wrong.
And Tom, you know me. I always do upgrading like the complete bass-ackwards way. So I'll like let points build up, and then it's like, oh, I've got 5 points. Let's add them to whatever I want to add them to. So I tend to do that, which isn't probably the preferred way. But I mean, unlocking the stances, especially early on, unlocking all the stances is important. And so the more that you can do within the world to expedite that process, the better you're going to be. And the more like full your experience with the combat is going to be, because it all starts to just sort of flow together once you get all of those unlocked, and you feel like then you have tools to approach whatever you're doing when you're in straight out combat.
Yeah, speaking
Joe, to kind of add on to that, the time where it felt like you had to start doing that was when you're trying to save the blacksmith brother in that town, and there's like all those little pockets of enemies. And there's a couple of room where there's like 5 guys in there, so you can't stealth them out. So you have to directly deal with that combat. I remember getting frustrated at that point, going, okay, I have to dump points into these stances because stealth no longer works here. The game is very good about trying to guide you about, hey, it's probably time to start to look at this tree. But it's cool that it does that in such a subtle way, and it just feels organic.
There was a 5 guys in that outpost. Geez, way to break my immersion. This game is trash. Western developer scum.
There was never more than 4 Japanese in a room ever.
Talking about tools and unlocks and everything flowing together, outside of the main story, there is a ton of side content in this game. You complete shrines, you rejuvenate in hot springs, you compose haikus, you ignite lighthouses, and explore fox dens, amongst other activities. Each provides you with a different boon. After the first act, they also layer on Mongol bases that you have to liberate. So, John, what was your favorite piece of side content, or what was your favorite bucket of side content?
Yeah, besides the legendary stories, right? Because they have some really great side content between like these great like epic stories that like about like, you know, historical figures that give you sweet gear, and like you have like your main companion stories. The little fox is the fox dens, right? It's such a cool way to say, hey, look, take a break, go explore over here, right? All right. And you would usually find them after you would like do some big story mission, or you're clearing a farm or something, and like, oh, you open up the map and here's the thing, like, oh, it's a fox den. Great. And it's just adorable. And the way that, and like, it's just like also like great level design. Because the way, like, oh, I see where it's taking me. This is cool. And sometimes it would just be really quick and easy. Sometimes it's really elaborate. And then, you know, you get to, like, pray at the den. It's awesome. And then you get to, like, you know, pet the fox if you want. And the fox is freaking adorable.
Yeah, you didn't mention
You have to end with the fox pet.
Yep.
You didn't mention that you're actually following a fox. So, like, you go to the fox den marker on your map, and there's a fox, like, sitting there, and you just follow it, and it leads you to the shrine. And it's just like, oh, okay, I'll walk over here now.
Follow me.
Cool.
And it makes that little, like, cute, like, chirp noise. Right. I mean, like, it's just so peaceful. Right. And I think that's the thing with all the side content. It's so peaceful and such a, like, the game is so amazing to where, like, I'm covered in blood because I just, like, slaughtered all these Mongols. Right. And, like, I purposely, like, found, like, the white dye merchant. So I always wear, like, all white. So, like, I am like this white ghost guy running in, just like red blood all over me, and like let's go pet a right or have a haiku, right? It's awesome.
Yeah, I think that touches on my sort of favorite thing about just the side content and the world in general is the exploration is really nice. So first off, it's a really fun world to just sort of go in a direction and see what's over here, and you always find something, right? It might not even be something super remarkable, it might not even be a point in the game that's super important, but you'll find something somewhere. And everything is in world, like, that's cueing you to these things. So like John mentioned, that you find the fox and you follow the fox, and Tom mentioned that. And then other points of interest, you'll see a bird that'll be flying around and you'll hear it chirping. And then when you go towards the bird, it'll lead you toward the other point of interest that you're looking for.
What's the deal with the bird? Because, like, you see the golden bird everywhere. It's like, all right, I'm riding Nobu over here to this point of interest. I'm going to this story mission. And it's like, oh, bird. All right, hidden thing. So I follow the bird. And it always leads to something, whether it's a straw hat or a sword or something. But I don't understand why the bird is, why there's a million of these golden birds leading me to trinkets all over Tsushima.
Video game?
I was going to say, no, wasn't there something early on in the game where...
There was one reference in the Golden Temple to something about Sakai's mother.
Yeah, because I was going to say...
the bird.
Yeah. I thought there was something like that, Mike.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what exactly the lady at the temple said, or maybe the lady at your house. But yeah, it's something about his mother liked the golden birds, and she believed they would, lead you to treasure or secrets or something like that. I thought. Usually it's just a new hat, but
yeah,
I like hats.
Well, thanks, Mom. I like the hats. That's great. Yeah. Anyone else want to mention their favorite piece of side content or favorite type of side content?
Well, I was just going to continue. I was going to continue on with like the point that I had there a little bit more. And it's just everything is in the world. So like when you're climbing somewhere, instead of everything being painted like in yellow paint, like it is in, infamously in a lot of games these days, instead it's like it's worn and erosion, or from wear of people actually climbing there before. Like you can see that it's like just sort of white with erosion, and that is sort of pointing you to the different spots that you can get for handholds, and everything is like within the world. So if you mark something on your map that you're going to go towards, it doesn't put like a sort of thing at the top of the screen that's pointing you in the direction that you have to go. Instead, you flick up on the thumb pad and it's the wind sort of shows you the direction that goes in, and it just all kind of flows together and creates this sort of immersion building experience instead of an immersion breaking experience like in a lot of games now. And I think that that's just super phenomenal. And, when you find a hot spring, it kind of makes sense that there would be a hot spring here, either overlooking the ocean or it's kind of close to a settlement, and all of this stuff just has a meaning to it, and it fits into the world so well. And I think that is also what makes just sort of seeking out a lot of these side things so much more rewarding than in a lot of other games where sometimes just it feels like you're just ticking off boxes. It's like, oh, I really just need to find this spot so that I can get a little bit more health, or I need to find this spot so I can get this item, and it's just like, no, here it's all about the experience that you're going through, and it's not just like action, but you're like in this world and living and interacting with it.
I'd just add quickly that in addition to all of the side content fitting seamlessly within the world, even the collectibles, and I detest collectibles in games. I detest having to find 50 Mongol records with a burning, fiery passion. But in this game, like, the lore behind them is really interesting. Like, I found one that has something about Lord Shimura that I think is going to pay off later in the game. The artifacts are relatively interesting, and like, even the smallest details down to the collectibles are unique and interesting within this wonderful game.
And I think, to kind of go off what Joe said there, I think that's where some of the open world games can start to struggle when it becomes a checklist. I I did the podcast with a friend of the show, Billy. We did Far Cry, right? And Far Cry 3 was this kind of different way to approach it. 4 kind of built off that in a way. 5, you could start to see kind of some of the threads of what the things that you were doing were starting to struggle, or there was fraying at the end of the mechanics. And in 6, I felt like 6 was a big checklist at times of me having to find certain things. And it's no longer about exploration. It's about me just kind of going down an itinerary of what's expected of me and going through it. I think the best way, as you would put it, about it being an immersive experience, the wind directing you where you need to go, I think is such a beautiful concept, because you just swipe up on the middle of the pad, the wind blows, you can see where it's traveling, and you just go that direction. And it doesn't break you away from just enjoying the world as you go. There's so many moments in the game that aren't even like side content mission related. The sunsets in some of the, if you guys have ever looked at the sky over that ocean, there are times where I'm playing and Kelsey's reading whatever smut book Kelsey's reading, and she'll look up and she's like, Brian, she's like, that is a gorgeous sunset. And we'll stop the horse and we'll look at the sunset for half a minute. And it's just like, man, this game finds moments of just serenity. When Jin gets naked and you watch his little butt cheeks get into the hot tub, or the hot springs, and he sits there, and then not only is it he can recover life there, he gets extra life for it, but it's also like he contemplates things that matter to him. He thinks about things. You kind of see how he views the world. Or when you sit down and you write a haiku, and each kind of part of the haiku leads to another portion where you kind of get an idea of how Jin works. Yes, it's side content, but it's side content with intent. And I think that at times gets really missed, where we have side content for the sake of it, but this actually adds to what we're doing.
And the haiku stuff is really neat, because that actually ties into samurai culture quite a bit. Because, you know, being like a samurai, like that wasn't just about being the most merciless killing force that you could possibly be, or the best tactician. It was all about also being well-rounded in the arts, and a lot of samurai would have some sort of artistic thing that they were good at. And one thing that a lot of samurai culture sort of had was this kind of writing of haikus or writing of different things. And that just became kind of this part of the culture that you'll see when we talk about Shogun, that it goes into a little bit within there, but it's actually in the book quite a bit. It's just a really neat inclusion that ties you into the game. It makes you have ownership over Jin, because you're choosing what all of these words are and how they go together. And it's probably not the best poetry. It's probably not great poetry, but it's interesting because you have agency in it. You're creating it. You know, and even if it's like when you're at a hot spring, like Brian was talking about, and sure, you just get to choose one of two things to contemplate about. But you still get to choose. And even if you're going to think about one of the other things later, it just gives you that agency. It's like, I think Jin would be thinking about this right now. And then you get a little bit of his inner monologue thinking about that while he's just sort of rejuvenating and reflecting. And it's just so cool, and it's so well done. And how it all just comes together. It is what makes this game so great, I think.
Yeah, I particularly like the hot spring bits too, and the agency that we have in it.
That's just because you like seeing his butt, right?
No, that was Brian.
Come on,
They look like two. They look like two little kneecaps.
Any other thoughts on side content before we jump on to the story of Act 1? All right, so the combat is phenomenal. The side content, phenomenal, and fits well within the world. Next, we're going to discuss the story of Ghost of Tsushima. So, spoiler alert, we might talk about story spoilers from Act 1 of the game.
Should we talk about, like, sort of non-spoiler related stuff first, just to give a general idea of, like, the flow of the story and stuff, and then maybe get into specifics down the line? Or, I don't know, how do you want to approach it?
Yeah, I didn't write down anything spoilery for the things that I want to talk about, so I don't really care.
Okay.
Are any of you guys bursting to talk about any of the big reveals from Act 1? All right, so maybe there won't be spoilers. I don't know. If we're going to spoil anything, we'll give an alert beforehand.
Yeah.
Ghost of Tsushima takes place during the first Mongol invasion. It opens.
Spoilers.
Oh
Jeez.
man! It opens with your protagonist Jin Sakai and the samurai of Tsushima as they battle the invading forces on a beach. They get their butts kicked. Jin is mortally wounded. His uncle Lord Shimura, the commander of the samurai, is captured, and the rest of the samurai are all massacred. A thief nurses Jin back to health, and he immediately goes on a suicide mission and gets his butt kicked by the big bad again. He miraculously survives, and he resolves to adopt unorthodox practices. The first act focuses on rescuing Lord Shimura. To do so, young Lord Sakai must recruit allies, sending you on missions literally all over the lower part of the island, completing story missions to win over the Lady Adachi, a vengeful samurai widow, Sensei Ishikawa, an expert archer, and childhood friend Ryozu, the leader of a group of outcast ronin. Along the way, Lord Sakai struggles with an internal conflict with the samurai code. So, Brian, I love to poke fun at you and how much you hate story in video games. So we're going to start with you here. What is the best element of the story of Ghost of Tsushima? Is it the plot, the setting, or the characters?
Oh Lord, that's actually kind of hard to answer because it is. I think all three are done really, really well. I think the setting, if we take just the world in general, which we already kind of like talked about in general, I think that might be my favorite part of it because the world is this organic thing that you just get to interact with, and it's a beautiful and serene and peaceful. Can't think of a lot of video games I play that are peaceful anymore.
Breath of the Wild.
It's there. Yes, that's fair. And at the same time, as much as Breath of the Wild, I think introduces interesting things. I think that there's more interesting things to be found in the world of Ghost of Tsushima than Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild has like stuff kind of all over the place, but in some ways feels really empty. I don't necessarily feel like that with Tsushima. Tsushima feels like an active world.
I was gonna say for Breath of the Wild, I feel like we're a lot of because I mean a lot of people say they love Hyrule and the world that you're in there for Breath of the Wild, but I feel like the sandbox nature of Breath of the Wild is much more so what pulls people in, and especially Tears of the Kingdom from what I've heard about it, because it's all about sort of creating things to get through situations, which is not as much of the focal point in Ghost of Tsushima as far as I would think anyway.
Yeah, I would say that once they moved away from kind of the linear dungeon approach, like that really kind of ended with mostly Skyward Sword, there is a significant amount of lore and world building that kind of got left behind for, hey, here's a sandbox, go do whatever you want. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with all games going forward being just that. I miss the lore of Hyrule, which is very, very brief in the most two recent games. In Tsushima, there's kind of things to learn everywhere, whether it's about the character you're playing or the environment that you're in. The characters themselves are fantastic. I think Jin is amazing. I think his uncle, he reminds me so much of Toranaga from
Shogun.
Why am I blanking? Shogun. There we go. And I love the conflict. Round characters, right, are interesting. So I assume most people know what round character means. If you don't, flat characters are characters that don't really change throughout a plot arc or a story arc. Round characters do. And there's this crazy kind of conflict that Jin is dealing with. He's been taught this samurai code. This is the way that we handle it. This is the honorable way to handle it. This is the only way to handle it. And when Jin actively runs into an enemy of an extreme strength, he finds out that you can't meet that with brute force and honor. It does not work. And so Jin has this crazy conflict of understanding, okay, like I've been taught to do this, but to be sneaky, to be killing from the shadows, these things that are considered dishonorable, that realistically is the path forward. And to watch him have to deal with that and to watch the conflict it causes with his uncle with it. And his uncle is almost so focused on keeping the tradition and ethical history of what they have built that he would rather have everyone obliterated but still follow his own moral code. And Jin does not agree with that. And I think that is so cool. His uncle is practically dogmatic and Jin is not. So I just think that is absolutely fascinating.
So does that just empower us all who rebel against our parental figures? Like, they don't see the world the same way as me, so, I'm going to do my own thing and forge my own way. Is that like the power fantasy we're all living here?
I think that considering that most of us are 40 and can barely afford a house while our parents are telling us that we don't work hard enough, I think some of it we need an outlet, yes.
Yeah. All right. Nailed it. And a real quick study here. We mentioned Breath of the Wild in a conversation with Ghost of Tsushima. One game, you play with your katana the entire game and you kill every enemy with it, and it's great and we all love it, and it's a priceless, timeless classic that we're all having a ball discussing. The other one, Link breaks everything that he touches. So, like, destructible weapons, not a fun mechanic, so let's just never do that again. Going back to our discussion.
It's good for you to be forced to try new things, Tom. Now, if you're trying to make me play crap games that are largely one big cutscene, I don't always think trying something new is a good idea. But when done sparingly and with actual thought, I think it's a good thing.
I'm just going to stare at you endlessly now. The rest of the podcast is just going to be silent.
You guys are in a standoff?
And I'm not moving. My feet don't lie.
Who's going to move first? Let go of triangle. Yeah, Brian.
So, Brian, just to wrap up there, you're saying that the characters were the strong point out of those three elements. Between plot, setting, and characters, you're going with characters.
I think it's really hard to separate the characters from the plot. To me, that's kind of one thing, to be honest. It's really hard because the world itself is what drew me, and the beauty of the world, the simplicity of the world, as Joe said, the immersive nature of the world. And there's times where I'm playing a game and I don't intend to, but I find peaceful moments where I can just kind of sit and breathe. I think that is extremely unique in gaming right now. So I think that maybe the setting is even more so, but not by much. I think Jin is really interesting, and he is someone who is trying to find a way forward for his people that may not, it horribly conflicts with what he knows. And watching him wrestle with that is also fascinating. So it's really hard for me to kind of separate those. I do think that they were extremely strong in all three categories. And there's not a ton of games that you can say that. They're either, oh, it's a great story. Oh, it's a great world. Oh, it's great combat. It's kind of crazy when they hit all three as well as they did. And it's still crazy to me that this game maybe doesn't get the accolades that it deserves. A lot of people still don't even know about this game.
Well, that'll change after OiO Game Club, my dude. So Brian's taking the coward's path and refused to take a stand here. Bernsey, you gonna yell straight plot homie or what?
No, so I'm actually going to say, like, the setting and the world is a lot of the reason why I think the story is great, because everything is kind of rooted in there, and I already sort of talked about that a little bit. And I'm gonna maybe cheat just a tidge, but the characters in general, which adds to the feeling of the setting. And I'm not even talking about the main characters. It's all of the little side characters that you find in random spots in the world that could end up being just a small little side mission. And you find out just one little other tidbit about kind of an aspect of this world. So there's one, for example, that I really enjoyed that dealt with this. You stumble across this group of women that are there, and they're waiting for the samurai that had survived the attack to come back. And so Jin is excited because he's like, oh, somebody else survived this attack. And then, you meet the guy, and he's not too keen to meet you because he's definitely not a samurai. He's just saying he is because he found some stuff and is trying to get by. And it's a really neat, just sort of small thing in there, but it adds so much life to just that world and a flavor to, like, all these people and what they sort of weave into the fabric that is this entire world that Jin is working his way through.
Were you horrified that you were lined up to kill that person in a duel?
I mean, it gave you the choice eventually, but yeah, it was, I don't know, it was interesting. I thought it was fun. And one of the other aspects that I want to bring up, and it's maybe a little bit of an aside here, but I think the other really cool thing, even for like these small, like that little small quest that took maybe 5 minutes to do, the start of every quest gives you like a title screen that's like this sort of Japanese script, and then it tells you the title in English for that quest, and then when it's complete, it'll pop that onto the screen too, which just adds to that sort of feel of like a samurai film, and like almost like that spaghetti western sort of feeling also about it, which I think is just really it's just really cool how that adds to it. And there's always, like, at the end of the quest, there's some funny little stuff that's going on. So like you'll be standing there and the horse will be like nudging you from behind, just like pestering you to like move on while you're just standing there. And it's just little things like that just adds so much to just the general feeling of the game, and sort of makes this setting just so memorable to live in.
Yeah, and I'll agree that all three phases of the game are excellent, but for me, it's the characters that set it apart. I particularly like the main allies that you're trying to recruit through Act 1. I think that Sensei Ishikawa, his deal is that he was training, he didn't take students very often, but he took on this peasant female as a student, and it winds up going terribly awry. And so you're trying to help rectify that situation. I thought that was really interesting. I thought that Lady Adachi and her horror story of having her whole family like basically murdered and her tale of vengeance, I thought going along for the ride with her was really interesting. And for me, it was like those main quest allies that really made the first act experience so enjoyable for me. John, where do you come in at?
I play this game and I immediately say, well, this is Samurai Witcher, right? This is Samurai Witcher 3 for me. And if anyone knows me, that bodes well. That's one of my favorite games of all time. And the reason why that's one of my favorite games, and this is as well, is it's what you're talking about. It's these side characters, right? The relationships you're building with these individuals, and Jin walking along the journey, and multiple people's journey. It's his journey, it's Yuna's journey, it's Lady Masako's journey. They are all going through, and it's also all these little journeys that you're seeing throughout the entire island, this war-torn island, right? So I think they do an amazing job of showing joy, showing pain, showing like the horrible things of humanity and hope also in humanity in some of these stories that you can really only do when you like talk about like the horribleness of war, right? And I think it continues, like I will say, like it continues to get darker and deeper and brighter and lighter in Act 2 and Act 3, right? But that is to me where it really is great, is every beat, whether it's an individual small story or the larger stuff, has something to say.
Well, and even like when you're out in the world and you take down a group of like wandering Mongols that are maybe like shaking down someone that was traveling along the road, like you'll stop and then they'll thank you and they'll give you something, and then you'll tell them, hey, go to this safe area, and then you'll see them in the safe area. It's just like, it's so cool because these characters, even though it's just this minor person that I saw along the road that was not even maybe part of a quest, and now they're here in this living area, and it makes it feel like a living, breathing world, which I think is super awesome also.
And the game gets really... We're in Act 1. We'll talk about more about Act 2 and Act 3, obviously, as the time is appropriate for that. But like the story is so good about adding weight to the decisions that you make in the game, and not, let's make it clear, the big things are going to just kind of be almost on the tracks. You can't make there's certain things that are going to happen that you can't really alter, but the game is so good about making you understand that decisions have consequences. And the later into the acts that you get, the more severe some of these consequences get, and it makes you think about what it would be like to have to make some of the decisions that are coming, and it just, there's a lot of emotional human tones to it. And if you can relate to the character, and I think Jin's an extremely relatable character, it just makes the game all the better.
Yeah. Mike, you gonna defend the plot's honor here or what?
Oh, great. I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. I did want to point out, when you're talking about the side character quests, of which we've got, the Lady Masako and Sensei and Ryuzo so far, and then there's more of them in the next chapter. There's a couple new ones introduced that have their own. What's great about those isn't just that the stories that you're going through are interesting, but they are. It's in going through their stories, it illuminates the characters of these NPCs in new ways as you progress. it exposes weaknesses, it teaches you history, and in some cases it changes their character as you progress their story in ways that you just don't usually see in a game, which I really appreciate. We can't talk about it because most of these are going to be completed in chapter 2,
Mhm.
at least for the characters you've met so far. But their stories goes to some places that are both dark and quite sad, honestly.
Well, great. We'll break all that down about 1 month from now when we're recording on, I think, February 13th for our part 2 discussion. All right, so everything we've said about this game is positive so far. Let's just keep this hype train rolling. Bernsey, where does Ghost of Tsushima shine?
Yeah, so aside from like the exploration and just the world in general, I think one of the other really great things, especially at this early point in the game, is the development and layering of the systems and abilities that you get as you go through the beginning parts of the game. So many games these days just like throw walls and walls of text at you of these are how you do all these abilities and this is how you do all of this. Whereas here it feels like you earn the stuff by you earn all the skills by doing things in the world that you're normally doing, and you seem to get them at the right point for when you start to get up against harder groups of enemies or situations that you need to approach. And it feels like that's just done so well, as it's like I'm getting this tool and now I can put it to use right away, or I've been struggling against this and now I got this stance and that's going to help me a lot because these stupid spear guys are so annoying to fight without that spear stance. And so it's like all that stuff seems to just sort of get to you at the right point to be rewarding and interesting and help it make sense in your head. And also then I guess on the other side of it, as someone who, kind of has an issue and needs to try to do everything in an area before moving on to the next area, like once I got to Act 2, and I'm not going to go into any details on anything, I don't feel like because I did a lot of these extra things and maybe gained another ability point on some of my stances than other people would have, I don't feel like I'm overpowered for these groups of people that I'm approaching. And so I feel like also it's just a really good balance as you're going through this. And at no point have I really felt like I'm just mowing through things, for instance. Like it's rewarding because I feel like I'm attacking a situation in the right way. But I think that's the other thing about this game so far anyway that's so good, is that I feel like I'm getting the tools at the right time and I'm able to use them so that it makes sense in my head and I remember how to do the different facets of stuff. But like I think John had said earlier, nothing's like if you don't have this, you're screwed. Like if you don't level up your kunai to level 5, well, you're never going to finish the game. I don't think anything's like that either. Which I just think is super awesome because it allows you to play the game and experience the game. And it gives you sort of benefits for kind of strategically thinking about stuff and what tools you want to unlock next to be able to approach those things. So I think that's one of the other things we didn't really talk about that I think is super great about this game so far.
Yeah. I have 3 points that I want to make for where this game shines, and I'll try to keep them all pretty brief. First off, it is visually stunning. I think this is the best looking game that I've played, and I don't think that's hyperbole. Like, it is just visually a masterpiece. The second point that I want to make, everything you do gives you useful rewards. Every side distraction, everywhere you go, everyone you talk to, just talking to a person on the map can highlight a point of interest somewhere else on the map, or chasing a fox gives you more resolve, and it's just every little thing helps make you more powerful, which is awesome. And the last thing I want to mention, I think this game has 2 standout mechanics that we've talked about throughout our discussion so far. The standoffs are an awesome, unique thing to Ghost of Tsushima, and I love that mechanic. And the guiding wind, which is the feature where you flick up on the touchpad and it points you towards your objective without having something visually overwhelming on the screen. I think those 2 mechanics are unique to this and both phenomenally well done. Mike, where does it stand out for you?
I did want to echo the point about this being a visually stunning game. It is so beautiful. I want to especially call out their use of really lush, oversaturated color. The reds and the greens and the yellows are unnaturally so, which just makes it more beautiful. It reminds me of the movie Hero, which did a lot of the same thing for some of the same reasons. And it's so eye-catching. But you guys have reminded me of something I did want to mention. and it has to do with the way they've kind of layered in the teaching moments in really subtle ways. If you remember, when you start the game, you start right away. You're not given any intro. You're not given any training. You're not given a mission to learn how to fight. You're literally starting with the combat where you meet Koga Khan. You find out that he's brutal, capable, and intelligent, and then you're thrown into battle. And because you haven't learned anything, it's realistically chaotic to you. You feel kind of helpless, which is what they want. You don't actually learn combat until a little later when Jin has a flashback to when he was a boy learning from his uncle. And then they teach you the basics of the sword combat. That is a really clever way to do it, and I appreciate what they did because I felt like it really brought you into Jin's shoes in a terrific way.
I love how you kind of put that, and I think that also adds to Jin. It forces Jin to realize that his skill set is severely underdeveloped for what he's dealing with. Everything he's dealt with before, the Code of the Samurai works as long as the other party that you're dealing with operates under essentially the same ethical guidelines. The Mongols don't. They just don't. They just obliterate and destroy. And Jin starts to realize in the face of an adversary of that kind of capability, you can't have that ethical code holding you back. You can't fight with one hand behind your back. You have to go all out. That's an awesome way to put it, man.
Yeah, that's a good point. Birdsey, shining moment for you?
I already talked.
Oh,
It's my turn.
Oh, yeah.
Mine has some shining moments.
You both have a J in your name. It's fine.
Yeah. You guys have nailed so many of the things, right? One thing that kind of ties it all together, right, that no one directly mentioned, though, is just the pacing, right? The overall pacing of this game, I think, is where it shines in so many ways. Like, I always talk about respecting my time and this and that. And, Brian, you've made points of like, I stopped and watched the sunset. And I've done the same thing, right? Every time I see a hot spring, I'm excited to go like relax and chill. Even like the haikus, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a little cute little haiku, a cool haiku, right? And nothing feels like it's being dragged on. Everything is quick and short. Like none of the side quests are like, oh, just end already. They're these little, like just tiny like stories. Right? Like the side content and all the content is almost like the haikus, right? Short, sweet, to the point, but very, meaningful. So I love how they have done that. Like when you are on the quest with your side characters, right? These NPCs, they're broken down into like, it's like one of two missions in the act or 3 or 4, however it is. But it's like the mission's maybe 10 minutes. So I love that I can go and I can like have this compartmentalized piece of like someone's life in this game. And then and that's it. There's a clear start and stop. And then if I want to keep going, I can. Or if I would say, okay, I'm done for the day, I can. Like that sort of stuff is just to me an amazing thing to do in such a wide and expansive world that they created that like makes you want to stay in it and then makes you want to see what's over the next hill because you're never tired of it.
John, you mentioned The Witcher 3 as one of your favorite games. Do you ever wish that this game had a mechanic where you could stumble into a quest like midway through, similar to The Witcher 3, where you didn't have to necessarily do every phase of an investigation if you wound up in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, like the world isn't as organic that way in this. There's a couple like quests where you kind of like, it's got that Witcher-esque like, oh, I'm seeing the footprints and this and that, right? And there's no detective mode. But yeah, it would have been cool to like stumble upon some of the things were like, oh yeah, I'm here midway and oh, here's the bandit group and I'm trying to save this guy or whatever. And you skip searching for him in the town and you just find him.
I thought it was interesting. This was a learning moment for me, but I didn't realize that all of Japan was made out of Play-Doh. Because like you follow a lot of footprints in this game. And fortunately, everyone that you need to track leaves footprints in the earth. So like, I had no idea. So thank you, Ghost of Tsushima, for teaching me about geography and geology and life.
Well,
it's a very unique soil.
Being like a horrible mass murderer in this world, right? Like causes it to rain. I didn't realize that. Like that is why it's never sunny. I'm always just not doing the samurai way, so that's why it's always muddy. So it makes sense in my world.
But then you just need to blow your flute if you want the sun to come out, and it'll change. The weather will change. And one other thing that's awesome, it's like, is the swipe right on the thumb pad to to shake all of the blood off your blade before you sheath it at the end of a battle is, I don't know, it's just the most samurai thing ever, and I love it.
I didn't even realize that was a thing. All right, so we've had an hour and 10 minutes of positives about this game.
Time out. Mike has to say one thing. Mike, your second point is one of my favorite points about this game, but I didn't want to steal your thunder because I agreed with it so much. Do you want to say what your second point was?
I'm sorry. I guess I thought I covered my points.
You talked about how the world is so vibrant and oversaturated with the color scheme. Maybe you had said that and I just missed it.
I did mention that just because it reminded me of the movie Hero, which did a lot of.
I'm sorry,
well.
I missed it then. But yeah, that is absolutely one of my favorite things. Just particularly the sunsets or the sunrises. Like, it is staggeringly pretty at times. How wildly colorful! I'm really lucky. A number of years ago, I had some boon to the business. And I wound up buying an LG OLED. And like just those bright oversaturated things that the screen does so well. Damn, just awesome. But when I saw that, I'm sorry I missed it when you had said it. But when I saw that, I'm like, that's like my main thing. But I better let him say it because I don't want to be rude because Tom calls me out when I say Tom stuff.
Well, it's only
I said I liked Fat Chocobo once, and Tom yelled at me. Jeez, Brian, Fat Chocobo. I like Fat Chocobo. It's just like, oh man, sorry.
Yeah, it's actually happened a couple of times on the show where you'll talk about something that's further down in the show notes that we haven't discussed yet. Like, you've read the show notes, and I appreciate the prep work, but then, like, you make my point well before I can make it. It's like, oh, well, I was going to talk about
You'd be shocked at how little I read the show notes. It's just natural, organic chemistry, Tom.
Yeah, well, I mean, I keep an eye on them. I know when people are in them and, like, making their comments. John, you were the first person to make a comment. Thank you. I appreciate you. Brian, do you want to go back and talk about loadouts, or should we move on with where this game struggles?
Yeah, I think the game could really benefit from that. That's a good point, Tom.
So we're an hour and 11 minutes in, all right? It's been all positive wonderland for Ghost of Tsushima. Burnsy, are there any cracks in this game? Where does this game struggle, and does it keep it from being like a masterpiece?
So the first thing I'll say is the game is a little difficult to pick back up after taking a 4-year break on it. So especially trying to remember like exactly what happened with the story stuff. But thankfully there's this wonderful invention that we have called YouTube, and you can watch people play through the story and get yourself caught back up. And actually combat really wasn't that crazy hard to get back into. Like jumping into like the early parts of Act 2, and it's like, okay, I remember kind of how a lot of this works. So that I guess is a positive. But yeah, the one thing that became very quickly apparent that I remember from loathing from my first time with the game when it first launched, and I was hoping it was something that was going to be implemented in the director's cut, which it is not, is yes, as was already foreshadowed, this game definitely needs a loadout system. All of the equipment that you get gives you a benefit to exploration, or it'll give you a benefit to an attacking style, or to stealth, or any sort of other things. And it is a pain in the tuchus to go back into the menu and have to swap out to find this hat and swap out to find this outfit. Because I want to be able to find these points easier. And then, I'm going to get into a battle, and is this going to be a stealth battle, or is it, and then I have to go back through, find this hat, find this garb, and it's just like, they really need a loadout, so you could quickly just sort of swap between 2 or 3 different outfits that you could use throughout the game.
So, they do have that. There is an option in the battle, in like the game options. It's not like a quick loadout where you can just tap a button. You still have to go into your gear and change your armor. But it saves all of your charms and your hat and everything, right? So there's an option to set the charms you use, because we did talk about like you get these little charms that boost your stealth or your arrow strength or whatever. So it makes sense to say, this is my stealth build. This is my ghost weapon build. Okay. So yeah, go in the menu options, and there's a like save loadout or save charms option. And that will then give you that ability on every one of your armor sets to create your own loadout. So then it's super easy. Oh yeah. Like I'm in the middle of battle and I want to switch over to like, yep, all right, my stealth is done. Right? Or my archery's done and I want to go just dive into the fray, switch over, jump into ghost armor or jump into my samurai armor, and then I'm done. Takes 2 seconds.
So I'm not the only person who was constantly changing gear. Like I wore my traveler's attire 90% of the time, but then every fight it's like, oh, samurai armor time.
Oh yeah.
There's a set of armor for combat that I will end up getting, maybe in Act 2, but it might be in Act 3. That after I got that armor, I really stopped wearing anything else. It was just because I didn't want to deal with the swapping all the time. Because like you said, it's time consuming and annoying. I never used really any of the archer stuff. I did, like you said, use some of the travelers because the traveler's armor lets you know when unfound things are nearby, and that's great. But it was clunky, and it's not like there's only a couple types of like armor. There's a bunch, and like when you talk about like hats and everything else, there's like 30 hats or if not more. But I think those are purely aesthetic. And I don't think there's benefits to them. Am I wrong on that one, or are they just aesthetics?
It's just aesthetic.
Yeah, I think they're aesthetics.
Yep.
Yeah, and I got tired of swapping out charms, so like my loadout is just my loadout. I have enough health. I generally survive when I go charging into a Mongol camp, and everyone has a great time doing it.
Now, there's John's tip of the week, right? Go change that option. It'll help you for Act 2 and Act 3 quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look for that. And I don't think that was there at launch, so it's good that they did add something like that in there because it is a lot, especially because you unlock like up to 4 or 5 charm slots eventually, and so it's like this is a lot to kind of go all the way through. So
my biggest struggle with this game, or my biggest issue, I guess I'll pose it as a question. How exactly did the Mongols capture a continent when all they do is stare at corners with their backs to the doorway? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, every time I go into a camp, it's like nobody's watching. Everyone's like looking at the shelf or looking at the wall or sleeping. And I just, all right, walk over here, stab him. All right, walk over here and stab him. It's not quite XCOM 2 for me. Like, eventually someone will notice and then everyone will swarm and then I just fight a big crowd. But I really struggle with how like distracted these Mongols can be. I'll share a very specific anecdote. When you get the Heavenly Strike move or epic ability, you go on a quest line for that. And part of that involves squeezing between 2 rocks, and there's this little area, and there's 6 Mongols in this small area. And like there's only one way in, and you have to murder them all. But they're all literally facing 4 corners of the room and a wall, and another guy was up on a hill facing away. So I just walked over to the first guy, stabbed him, I wasn't even stealthing. I was just walking, just boop, 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 boop. And it's like, there's only one way in. Not one of you was watching the door.
They were all peeing, and they were saying, nobody look. Nobody look.
yeah.
I mean, Brian, Mike, you guys have both been in Elden Ring, where you face constant arrays of challenging enemies. Like, did you find that off-putting at all, the AI for enemies as you're walking through their camp?
I don't think that the difficulty in this game is very high in general.
No.
I'm playing it on the second highest difficulty, and you can still kind of wash things as long as you're timing. I mean, they're very liberal with parries and all that kind of stuff. And the fact is that later on when you get more perks, I mean, it gives you more stuff. Like Tom, you'll eventually get a perk that it'll let you know if somebody will see you when you kill that guy you're targeting.
Huh.
Yeah. Like the game's really there to help you. I don't know, and maybe Mike has a different opinion on it, but I don't think that this game was really built with a high level of combat in general. I think that the combat system is enough to make the game interesting, but I also don't think it's the deepest combat system I've ever played in any kind of stretch. So I think it's sufficient for what it needs to do. I think occasionally you might get killed. I think the one area where it does shine is when you're doing duels, because then you are forced to deal with what's coming at you, and that's definitely a different feel. But that's just my experience. And before Mike takes over, I will tell you guys this. For those of you playing this the first time, if you use Heavenly Strike, say you're on the edge of a river, and you use it, there's a weird kind of glitch that still works in the director's cut. You'll dash forward with your sword, but you'll cross 3/4 of that river on that animation, and then he'll start swimming. So now you don't have to deal with like swimming slowly anywhere anymore.
Nice pro tip. Thanks, B.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. This game is not trying to be difficult, at least on any setting short of the highest one. It wants you to feel like a badass samurai or a super sneaky killer ninja. It wants you to be the hero. So unless you really choose to make it difficult by upping the difficulty settings,
I really
it's
wish.
not
So-
impossible or even hyper difficult for most of the time until the duels. Some of the duels are tough, but that's intentional.
I really wish that Sekiro had that same feeling. Like, it's very random that the game just ends with an unbeatable bullfight.
Yeah.
That combat is so much fun, and I am so sad that you couldn't figure that part out. Like, I mean, there's YouTube videos of cheating the thing. I don't know how far down that rabbit hole you went, but there's so much fun that you missed.
Yeah.
Just a regret.
Yeah, pretty good game, but man, I hated that boss fight. My other big issue with Ghost of Tsushima, and this is a pretty minor thing, but it happened in Act 1, it happened in Act 2, it's like, oh, here's a new act. Great, we're going to embark on a new chapter of the story. Let's go do some story missions. Great, they are all on the far edges of the continent. It's like, okay, I know I have to explore this world, but you couldn't throw me a bone. There couldn't be one, like, halfway between the edge of the earth, like... Oh man. Okay.
There's a couple that are close to where you enter the second area. Come on. Let's not.
And then
Let's
just fast
not.
travel.
Well, you can't unless you've been there.
Well, right, but when you play that game, I think even riding larger distances doesn't take that long, and every little spot that you can backtrack super quickly in that game. So worst case scenario, you're riding for like 4 minutes, and you're going to slaughter eating parties. So it's a good time on the way.
Yeah, it still takes a while to ride 1.2 kilometers on Nobu, dude. So like, yeah, it isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's like, oh man, that is just a long ways to go. And like, eventually you have to get out there to progress things.
And I think, Tom, that brings me into kind of one of my big gripe, which again is not a big gripe. And it's so funny. Like I said, pacing is one of my favorite things. Padding is one of the things I don't like. And I think this is just open world games do it, right? You got to have your collectibles. You got to have all this, right? And like, there's certain things where I'm like, ooh, there's a question mark. I want to go get it. And I get there and, oh, it's just a hero shrine. And I got a sword hilt that I'm never going to look at. Right. Like those things. I'm like, I didn't need that. Like that wasted my time. Or like, man, I really want to do some quests, but yeah, I got to ride all the way across and I get it. It's part of the pacing because they want you to journey along a path to get to that person and you're going to see things along the way. But like, I do feel like there's a little bit of wasted time there and they could have really just dropped some of the extra things about like, look, I don't need to be in your world. I'm already going to be in your world. I'm loving it, but I don't need to run around so that I can go ahead. Like you have way cooler things you've been doing. Why am I finding sword handles at shrines that do nothing when I could do more like duels? Or I could, like, even do more, like, clear more farms or more lighthouses.
Yeah, so the transition to the director's cut from the original PlayStation 4 game was really seamless. You just pull, as long as the save is on your system, it pulls in that save file, and it's just all there. You basically say which ones do you want to pull in, and you're good to go. So I get into there and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what was I in the middle of doing? Where am I wanting to go? And then I was like, well, let's just double check and make sure I got everything in the first area. And so I look at it and it's like, oh, there's like a few question marks. There must have been some things I missed. No, it was going back and every single one of the question marks was a guy telling me to go play Legends mode. And it's just like, why do you make that a question mark? It's so annoying.
I forgot about that. Like, look, you didn't need that. There's extra padding. Like, man, like I'm kind of a completionist. I like to do everything. And now I'm like, oh, there's a whole multiplier component. I don't need that. I don't need it with this. You guys didn't need it.
I will say, I would like to try it. It actually was really high regarded when they released it after launch. And it's supposed to be pretty fun. I don't know how fun it is still to this day. I don't think it's dependent upon, I think it's like PvE. So I don't think it's PvP. And so I don't know, it'd be fun if we wanted to try that as something before we record next month. Cause that would be interesting to see how it works.
Yeah.
They definitely didn't need to like throw it everywhere you go.
Oh yes.
Right.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, lots of legend storytellers. I think that's all of us talking about where the game struggled. So for those of us who haven't completed the game yet, I wanted to talk about, to wrap up our discussion with what we hope for and expect to see in the rest of the game. So John, let's start with you. What are you hoping for beyond Act 1?
I mean, so I'm almost completed. I've completed Act 2, right? I'm really just I'm just excited to see what happens. And I'm also just excited to see where they take the little, like, there's a DLC island. And when you start Act 2, you have access to it. And like, I was like, oh, when should I do this in the story? Because I Google everything, and it's like, oh, finish the main story. Great, I'll save that for later. So I'm excited to see what the little snippet of that ties into the main story. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see how Jin wraps up his story, his relationship with his uncle, what happens with the Khan, and all this stuff like that. Just ready to see the culmination of it all.
And Bernsey, you played this game with the unenviable 4-year break in between when you started and when you picked it back up. Where are you at now, and what do you expect from the rest of the game?
Yeah, so I'm like a fourth or a fifth of the way through Act 2. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to see where all the threads go and how they come together, and how, like, all these characters that you've gotten to know or gotten reacquainted to via YouTube, like what it is that happens with what it is that happens with each of them, and to what extent all of this is going to wrap up. Super interested in that. And so, and then when, after we decided we were going to play this, they announced the sequel, Ghost of Yote. And so super excited to see. I know there's not going to be any correlation because it like takes place 300 or 400 years into the future. But yeah, that was just one other thing I wanted to throw in there. But yeah, I'm super excited to see where this game goes, and to see what the Iki Island is like, and to give Legends mode a shot just to see what that multiplayer is like too.
Yeah, I can't wait to tom it up in the multiplayer. I bet I drive you crazy, my friend. I see a fracture coming between Lord Sakai and Lord Shimura, and I'm just interested to see how that's going to play out and what exactly is going to happen with the uncle, Shimura. I think that's going to be really interesting. Brian, Mike, do either of you have a closing thought on Ghost of Tsushima before we wrap up here?
I do.
I wrote a haiku. I'll let Mike go first.
What I really hope, honestly, is I hope every one of you guys finishes the game, because it's a great ending, and it's something that I want each of you to see and experience, because it's a wonderful capstone on this game if you make it through the end. And if you do, I want to put a pin in something right now. I mentioned that at the beginning of the game, they do that training. We had that flashback to when Jin was a kid learning how to fight with swords from his uncle. They layered in a beautiful bit of foreshadowing. There is an exchange in that conversation that's like an hour into the game at most that links directly to the end of the game, which however many hours later. And it's such an elegant bit of foreshadowing that, if you haven't seen the end, probably doesn't mean anything. But knowing the end, it's really poignant to remember it. So I'm really hoping you all get to that end so we can talk about it.
That's interesting. One follow-up question for you, Mike. When we get to the end, can we go back and mop up side stuff then? Or do we have to wrap up all side content before we get to the end of this game?
I'm pretty sure you can wrap up side content after you finish the story. I'm about 99. I did everything before I finished the story, but I believe it is possible to go back out in the world after completing the story, if memory serves.
Yeah, I'm probably going to mainline the story from this point to try to wrap it up before our next discussion, but I do want to do all the side stuff. I love all the side tales, and I'm just having a ball exploring this world. Brian, let's hear your haiku.
Before I get to that point, Mike, you and I really kind of think a lot alike in how this game works. Elegant's a great way to put it, because they are so good at tying. Nothing is worse. Towards the end of Game of Thrones is a great example of this, when there's so many side stories going on and so many threads just get left unfinished that they just are like, well, we don't have time. We'll move on. And they just kind of forget about it and it never happened. This game's really good about going, okay.
I mean, they're just teleporting around Westeros the way that you're telling Tom to teleport Jin around Tsushima. It's the same thing.
That's kind of a system in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very progressive.
Thank God they had that solid state hard drive that could go quick. The developers were really good about understanding what are poignant, important things that they had to kind of wrap up, and they did so with genuine care to it. And that's why the end of the game, when there is big decisions to make, it's so much heavier. The haiku that I wound up making said, the nerds meet again. John's beard has gone unholy gray. Tom begs for the cash.
Yeah, I love it, Brian. And remember, you can support the show at patreon.com/OIO. That's patreon.com/OIO. And check out our sponsor's website at premierhealthmn.com. That's premierhealthmn, as in Minnesota.com.
John did not smile at all. That is the face. I said it. John just glared into the camera. You look like Jamie from Mythbusters. Just pissed.
What is an unholy gray, but I'm down with it. I approve. That's right.
That's going to wrap up our part 1 discussion on Ghost of Tsushima. We're going to come back next month to wrap up our discussion. We'll talk about Acts 2 and 3 and our overarching thoughts on the game. We're going to record that on Thursday, February 13th at 7:30 p.m. Central Time, as long as that works for everyone on the camera. I know it does for 2 of you. Yeah. Uh-oh.
I believe so.
We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it works out. We'll figure something out. I hope you'll jump in and play with us. Please support Outside is Overrated at patreon.com/OIO. And until next month, stay inside, kids.